Welcome back to another instalment of New Zealand Bird of the Week, where in this video I will be talking about the takahē, a unique bird that was thought to have been extinct for many years, but was incredibly rediscovered. Takahē are a large flightless bird endemic to New Zealand, and are in fact the largest member of the rail family, at around 50 centimeters in height and at a weight of 2.7 kilograms in the largest of birds, and is therefore closest to moorhens, coots and crakes. Birds have a beautiful plumage that consists of a mix of turquoise, blue and green, which really makes them stand out compared to their relatives. Birds possess a large red conical bill, which extends onto the forehead as a frontal shield. They predominantly feed on the leaf bases of tussock grasses, using their powerful beaks to quickly strip off large amounts of these grasses for consumption. They will, however, supplement their diets with large insects, such as moths and weta, making them omnivorous, and will on rare occasions take ducklings or lizards, in the case of an individual at Zealandia. Although this behaviour was previously unknown in takahē, the related Pukeko have also been noted to occasionally feed on the eggs and nestlings of other birds, and they have also been observed feeding on fantail. Takahē live in pairs or in small family groups, and pairs are monogamous, remaining together for 12 years or more. Birds begin to nest between October and January, and both males and females share incubation and chick rearing equally. They lay between 1 or 3 eggs and can nest a second and even third time if their first clutch fails. They build a large nest under bushes and shrubs, and once the chicks hatch, remain in the nest for about a week, being fed tussock shoots with the tougher outer leaves peeled off by the parents until they become strong enough to climb out and follow their parents. The chicks are covered in a jet black fluffy down when young, and as they grow older, begin to look more like a duller version of their parents, maintaining a dark bill which gradually becomes red as they mature. The juveniles can breed in their first year, and often remain with their parents for up to 2 years until they are fully mature, and can even help them in raising another batch of chicks. Takahē are strongly territorial, with territory sizes ranging up to 50 hectares, and pairs will defend their breeding territories by calling and fighting if absolutely necessary, as they return to the same areas each year. Birds remain primarily in grasslands until the arrival of snow, where they then descend to lowland forests or scrub to find more nutritious foods. Takahē, despite having wings, are flightless, and being stockily built, are among the largest native birds still living in New Zealand. Being a rail, their short and strong legs help them effectively traverse their mountainous habitats, which they were rediscovered in, and their wings, while reduced, do help them in clambering up slopes. Takahē are also quite noisy and frequently call, with the contact call being easily confused with that of the weka, but is generally more resonant and deeper, and can also produce a quiet hooting call and a muted boom indicating alarm. Interestingly enough, takahē being flightless isn't actually all that uncommon amongst their other relatives, as the wings of all rails are short and rounded, and their relative weakness of flight means that they are easily blown off course, and are therefore common vagrants, hence why they have colonised many isolated oceanic islands. Furthermore, these birds often prefer to run rather than fly, especially in dense habitat, which is mainly where takahē are widespread. Of the roughly 150 historically known rail species, 31 extant or recently extinct species became flightless independently, and already being weak flyers and with little predation from ground-dwelling predators and terrestrial habits, could very easily become flightless. As few as 125,000 years were needed for the recently extinct Laysan rail to lose the power of flight, and it is evident that measuring the evolution of flightlessness in rails can be very rapid. Unfortunately though, this ability to become flightless has meant that when humans arrived and brought with them a great many predators, many of these birds' flightlessness proved to be disadvantageous, and as we'll get into, nearly proved fatal for the takahē. The origins and evolution of the takahē are also interesting in the case of their evolution, as their kind have actually evolved a second time, and may just do so a third. To understand this, it is worthy to turn our attention to the North Island Takahe, otherwise known as the moho or mohuao. Long considered conspecific with the South Island Takahe, the two birds' relationship was reviewed in 1996, revealing that the North Island and South Island birds were quite different. First described by Richard Owen based on bones collected in South Taranaki, he coined the genus name of Notornis, Greek for southern bird, which were assumed to be that of an extinct species, also being the genus that the South Island Takahe was placed into. The North Island Takahe was a fair amount larger than its southern counterpart, weighing around 4 kilograms and overall being taller and not as bulky as the Takahē of the south, and likely having survived until the late 1800s, was the largest rail to exist in historic times. Genetic differences between moho and takahē have also come to light, and it was revealed that the birds were genetically divergent, showing that the moho in fact shared a common ancestor with the living Pukeko, and the takahē tracing their lineage back to a separate group of swamp hens. What was postulated is that moho and takahē did not diverge from a common ancestor once the islands of New Zealand had separated, but instead that the moho and Pukeko shared a common ancestor in Australia, while the takahē, which is genetically closer to South African swamp hens than the moho or Pukeko, traces its lineage back to a rail that would have flown from that region. So, interestingly enough, the two takahē species represent two separate colonisations of rail species that both subsequently evolved large size and flightlessness. This example of parallel evolution is especially interesting, given that the North Island Takahe most closely resembles a large Pukeko in terms of its overall build, indicating that it was a more recent arrival in the country compared to the birds in the South Island. The Pukeko represents what the ancestral takahē would have looked like when they initially colonised New Zealand, and to witness both the precursor and descendant living at the same time, and the North Island Takahe appears to be an example in the middle of this transition, is really quite extraordinary, and the North Island Takahe appears to be an example of the middle of this transition, being bigger and more bulky than a Pukeko, but comparatively more lithe when compared to the South Island Takahe. Given evolutionary time, the moho would have almost certainly become heavier and more takahē-like, but it unfortunately never got the chance. When Maori arrived in New Zealand, the birds, never being too numerous, were a great source of food, given their large size as evident from several midden deposits, and predation by the introduced kiore would have also impacted them. When Europeans arrived in the 1800s, populations were at such low levels that they were nearly extinct, and were believed to be by the first naturalists to describe their remains. Then, in the autumn of 1894, a surveyor named Morgan Carkeek, working in the North Ruhine Range, was reported to have caught and brought down a bird, which was described to have been unfamiliar, large, and blue. The skin was delivered to the home of Roderick MacDonald, which caused great excitement among older Maori, who recognised the bird as being the rarely seen mohuao. There are no records of the bird's immediate fate, but the skin and feathers, now unfortunately no longer in existence, were kept in the homestead for many years. After this, no North Island Takahe were ever seen again, and this was likely the only known case of Europeans witnessing these birds. While the last North Island Takahe became extinct, the South Island birds were also experiencing their own rapid decline. Birds were already incredibly rare by the time of European settlement, and were restricted to some of the country's most remote localities, particularly Fiordland and Lake Tianau, and only 4 specimens were ever collected in the 19th century, one of which in excellent condition was the only mounted takahē in New Zealand. After 1898, hunters and settlers continued to report sightings of large blue and green birds, although with none of these sightings being authenticated and the only other specimens being fossil bones, the takahē was once again considered extinct. However, one man denied that the birds were extinct, and that man was Geoffrey Aurbell. A doctor and keen tramper and/or bushwalker, takahē had fascinated Geoffrey since his school days, and read widely about this large flightless bird that had encountered man, but was now considered extinct. Despite widespread scientific acceptance, unconfirmed reports and possible sightings had convinced him that they must still exist, and they were most likely found in the Murchison Mountains near the aforementioned Lake Tiarnau. Over the years, Aubel plotted sightings on a map of Fiordland, and discovered a pattern, that being that all of the captures and sightings had occurred below the bushline, and in years of heavy snowfall. No one had yet searched for takahē on the tussock-rich slopes, and that was likely where they were all hiding. On April of 1948, after shooting a stag on a hunting trip near the foothills of the Murchison Mountains, Aubel heard the call of a bird that could not be readily identified, and after later searching, discovered a trail of footprints, which had one unusual feature, that being that the hallux or big toe was bent inwards, just like the toe of the bird at the Otago Museum, confirming in Aubel's mind that they were still alive. Scientists were skeptical of the discovery, dismissing it as that of a heron, but Aubel pressed on, and alongside a few friends, ventured out into the same region, this time equipped with a camera and 30 yards of rabbit net, and were determined to prove the takahē's continued existence. Then, suddenly, a large blue-green bird stepped out from amongst some snow tussock. No more than 20 metres away from Aubel, a living Notornis had defied scientific expectations, still alive in view of the party. After this, another bird was soon spotted, and both were swiftly netted, and leg roped to sticks planted in the beach, with a third bird running off. Photographs were taken, and the two birds were set free, at which point they rushed off into the tussock. The rediscovery of the takahē was a sensational discovery in both New Zealand and overseas, and the lake where the birds were found was named Lake Aubel in his honour, and was most definitely one of the most remarkable cases of species rediscovery in recent memory, especially in New Zealand. The New Zealand government took immediate action by closing off a remote part of Fiordland National Park to prevent the birds from being bothered, although there were different perspectives on how the population of around 400 should be conserved. Some wanted for the takahē to be left alone, but many worried that the takahē would be incapable of making a comeback, and that immediate conservation efforts needed to be made to avoid a similarly preventable fate like that of the huia. Interventionists then sought to relocate the takahē to island sanctuaries and breed them in captivity, although ultimately no action was taken for nearly a decade due to a lack of resources and a desire to avoid conflict. The takahē population was, however, in quite a precarious position despite the remote habitat, and later events would soon prove to have a tremendous effect on the seemingly stable population. For one, while it was easy to make a case for these birds being particularly well adapted for life in the upland tussock meadows, subsequent finds of subfossil takahē remains have shown that these birds were once widespread across the South Island, being mostly found on forest edges and near swamps. While they can eat throughout the day, acting like a bird version of a cow, they are clearly adapted to a general browsing habit suited to a whole range of grasslands, and their alpine home of the Murchison Mountains is far from their typical environment, rather being a last refuge once their lowland forests and swamps were either burned or drained. While seemingly safe in their mountainous haven, potential threats to the birds were beginning to make an appearance. Being introduced in the late 1800s, stoats had managed to penetrate even the most remote New Zealand environments, and by the 1950s were present in even these environments. Stoat predation is typically quite low due to the harsh environment reducing their populations, although when environmental conditions conspire, such as in a tussock or beech mast seeding event, stoat populations have been known to increase significantly, and in 2007 as an example, reduced the Murchison population by over 50%. Red deer, another introduced mammal, had also found their way up into the takahē strongholds, and were arguably an even worse threat than the stoats, as they rapidly ate through much of the highland forest undergrowth that the takahē depended on, therefore reducing both the health of the birds and the potential that the birds could raise their young. From the late 1960s, a decade of deer culling at a rate of 1,000 deer a year helped to arrest the natural forest decline, and extensive trapping of stoats helped to reduce their populations. However, due to tussock being slow to recover from such heavy browsing, at around 20 years, the food which the takahē depended on was still heavily reduced for years to come, and by the early 1980s there were just over 100 takahē left. To remedy this, programs focusing on artificial breeding at sites such as Burwood and Mount Bruce Native Bird Reserve helped to preserve some of the birds and to produce more young, and a real breakthrough came in the former, where a so-called takahē factory which stocked itself with a surplus of eggs collected from the wild utilised oven-sized incubators maintaining dozens of eggs, which assisted the birds as it both limits population density to a suitable level and avoids inbreeding by removing and reintroducing birds between different sites, as well as increasing productivity. To prevent hatchlings from becoming attached to their human caretakers, takahē-shaped puppets and models are used to provide food and brooding for the chicks, which are then released back into the wild. Later on, transfer to predator-free islands was also commenced, and while initially controversial due to the thought that the grasses on the islands wouldn't be suitable for the birds, this was thankfully proven wrong, and takahē have managed to survive well, and functions well in maintaining populations of takahē if any dramatic declines were to occur on the mainland. Takahē have been introduced to islands such as Mana, Kapiti, Maud and Tiri Tiri, as well as to predator-free mainland sanctuaries like Zealandia and Orokonui, for both preserving populations and increasing genetic diversity by moving them around, and as previously mentioned, rearing chicks away from their parents. After a close brush with extinction, takahē were finally starting to increase in numbers despite many setbacks and genetic diversity, and in 2018, the takahē recovery program made a monumental step in reintroducing takahē back into parts of their former range, where 18 birds were released into Kahurangi National Park, marking the first time takahē had been present in the region for well over 100 years, and later reintroductions established Kahurangi as another significant population for the birds, and established that introductions were now a key part of bringing the takahē back from the brink. The birds have continued to do remarkably well since then, and have moved from nationally critical to nationally vulnerable, although due to their fantastic recovery, the lack of suitable habitats with low predator numbers could prove to be a challenge, but through predator control, reintroductions to more locations could be possible. Unfortunate setbacks have however occurred throughout the years, and not just from stoats and deer, but also from humans. It was reported in 2015 that 4 birds were accidentally killed by deer hunters, under contract by the Department of Conservation to reduce the populations of the similar-looking Pukeko in a case of mistaken identity, including a case in 2009, having removed an equivalent of 5% of the current population, an equivalent to the loss of 160 tigers or 93 pandas. Now numbering over 400, the population of takahē is increasing at around 10% a year, and the recovery goals set in the early 1980s, both the short and long term, are now well underway. Takahē are surely among the most iconic of New Zealand birds, their scientific name being the title of the journal known as Notornis, and due to their critically endangered position, have found their way into the minds and hearts of both the people of New Zealand and around the world, narrowly avoiding extinction and being discovered and saved at practically the last minute by scientists. And while a lack of genetic diversity has meant that their progress in terms of breeding has been hampered, and the shadow of stoats at least for the mainland population still looms, the future for the takahē is brighter than it has ever been, and reintroductions to areas like Kahurangi means that the takahē may just return to even more of their former range. And with that, I thank you for watching this instalment of New Zealand Bird of the Week. For next time, you are now able to vote for the soft-plumaged petrel, an aptly named fluffy petrel species. And with that, I'll see you next time, whenever that may be.